The United States was on the verge of dissolution on March 9, 1861, when Abraham Lincoln arrived in Washington, D.C. for his first inaugural address. The states of South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Florida had all voted to secede from the Union, and Texas's governor had been overthrown for refusing to secede. The departing administration of President James Buchanan had bankrupted the Treasury, while his Secretary of War, John Floyd, had secretly shifted Union armaments to Point South to arm the intended insurrection. Fort Sumter, South Carolina, was surrounded by armed secessionists ready to strike, and an assassination plot against Lincoln was planned, along with a plot to disrupt the official counting of the Electoral College ballots in the capital. General Winfield Scott, a hero in the War of 1812, took measures to secure the capital with thousands of federal troops.
Any man who attempted by force to obstruct or interfere with the lawful count of the electoral vote should be lashed to the muzzle of a 12-pound gun and fired out of a window of the Capitol. I would manure the hills of Arlington with fragments of his body, were he a senator or chief magistrate of my native state. It is my duty to suppress insurrection. My duty.
This siege of the Capitol and coming war was for Lincoln not merely a conflict between the North and the South, but a world war against the British Empire. Lincoln knew the British Empire viewed the U.S. government, founded on the principle that all men are created equal, as a threat to the continuation of their empire. Lincoln also knew that the British Empire had not only steered the development of the present secession, but had organized continuous secession movements to break up the Union since the American Revolution. Alexander Hamilton, the first Treasury Secretary and founder of the American system of economics, was assassinated in 1804 by Aaron Burr, the Vice President of the United States. At the same time, Burr organized a military insurrection against the government to create a separate nation composed of the vast Louisiana Territory and part of Mexico. The design, funding, and brashness of Burr's operation were not his own.
I have just received an offer from Mr. Burr, the actual Vice President of the United States, to lend his assistance to His Majesty's government in any matter in which they may think fit to employ him, particularly in endeavoring to effect a separation of the western part of the United States from that which lies between the Atlantic and the mountains, in its whole extent.
The British government which deployed Burr burned the capital to the ground 8 years later in the War of 1812, and organized a secession movement of the New England states, a system driven by the British East India Company and its Secret Intelligence Service Director, Lord Shelburne. As the United States defeated these various attacks, Shelburne's successor and protege, Lord Palmerston, turned to the British slave system in the southern U.S. as the new axe to chop apart the United States. The slavery system, destroying the southern United States, was a critical part of a worldwide British economic system, to which Adam Smith gave the name free trade. Beginning in West Africa, the British East India Company, Royal Africa Company, and others captured slaves. These slaves were shipped to the Western Hemisphere to create the slave plantation system of the southern United States. The principal product of this system in the 19th century was cotton, 75% of which was exported to England. Here, English peasants worked for shillings to turn the cotton into low-quality textiles, which were then sold in India, the crown jewel of the empire. The Indian subjects, denied the right by the British to produce for themselves, paid for the textiles with opium crops. The Indian opium was then shipped from India to China, where it was forced on the Chinese people for enormous profit, addicting millions to the life-sucking drug. The profits from this cycle, characterized by East India Company lackey Adam Smith as buying cheap and selling dear, was the foundation of the empire's existence. An interruption of any one part was an interruption to the whole.
In dealing with vulgar-minded bullies, and such unfortunately the people of the United States are, nothing is gained by submission to insult and wrong. The U.S. have no navy of which we need be afraid, and they might be told that if they were to resort to privateering, we should, however reluctantly, be obliged to retaliate by burning all their seacoast towns.
Palmerston never gave up the hope that the United States could be broken apart, that you could destroy the American system. And so Lord Palmerston was naturally a supporter of the Confederacy. In fact, he wrote a letter January 1st, 1861 to Queen Victoria, praising the British and French troops taking of Peking at that time. And then he said, "We also are on the verge of the dissolution of the United States." And this was good news for Britain.
When Lincoln was elected in November 1860, the British had recently conducted war against Russia in 1854 and against China in 1859, when the Chinese attempted to block the smuggling of opium into their ports. Now, in 1861, a great war was imminent, pivoted on whether the British or the American system would prevail in the Western Hemisphere.
Lincoln knew that he was going into a war. The key of Lincoln, the character of Lincoln, going into the inauguration and through his presidency, was he was on the front lines of a war against the British Empire. And he knew it. He was being shot at. Eventually, obviously, he was assassinated. But there were many attempts against him, as if he was a soldier in the battles. But it was his ideas, it was his mind, which drove the victory over the South. That was why he was the #1 target.
In Lincoln, because of the nature of the conflict over slavery, he very much always came back to the Declaration of Independence. That this, for I think any of the great figures in the United States, the Declaration and the Constitution are one piece. So Lincoln rested on all men are created equal and have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That these are inalienable rights. And they are embedded in every individual human being, that there is no difference.
On his trip to Washington for the inauguration, Lincoln was notified of an assassination plot laid for him at a scheduled stop in Baltimore, Maryland.
Now, when he passed through Philadelphia, after having been informed of this plot, he stood right here on this spot and participated in a flag-raising ceremony on the morning of February 22nd, 1861.
I have never had a feeling politically that did not spring from the sentiments embodied in the Declaration of Independence. I have often pondered over the dangers which were incurred by the men who assembled here and adopted that Declaration of Independence. I have pondered over the toils that were endured by the officers and soldiers of the army who achieved that independence. I have often inquired of myself what great principle or idea it was that kept this Confederacy so long together. It was not the mere matter of the separation of the colonies from the motherland, but something in that declaration giving liberty not alone to the people of this country, but hope to the world for all future time. It was that which gave promise that in due time the weight should be lifted from the shoulders of all men, and that all should have an equal chance. This is the sentiment embodied in that Declaration of Independence. Now, my friends, can this country be saved upon that basis? If it can, I will consider myself one of the happiest men in the world if I can help to save it. If it can't be saved upon that principle, it will truly be awful. But if this country cannot be saved without giving up that principle, I was about to say, I would rather be assassinated on this spot than to surrender it.